Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about AI Readiness Accelerator, building your 2026 advantage. As AI is moving from hype to practical value, as we see is the winners of 2026 will be who plans today, right? So join us today on a strategic session. My name is Michael Luttenberger. I am a field CTO that covers data and AI, all things AI. So that's AI agnostic, whether it's Copilot, ChatGPT, you name it, doing all sorts of different things within it, from advisory to building agents to MCP servers and everything in between. This is going to be our agenda today. So again, we're going to start kind of an intro, right? Building our use cases, our AI investment, identify where the value of AI lies, right? That's super important. We'll show a couple charts that shows where, some of those gaps have been in the past, or certain things that have fallen off where we can help with that. Kind of identify those things. Again, talk about data and security and governance. Again, those are crucial parts before you want to kind of unleash AI into your organization. Again, privacy and risk around it, and then where to start. So this is statistics out there by IDC that says basically every company that, for every $1 that a company invests into generative AI, it's getting basically gains back of $3.70. And again, obviously this number can sway between different use cases, different departments, but this is kind of the average that we're looking at. Again, I've seen some with customers that we work with that are much higher than this. I'm sure everybody's seen that article or the chart that's going around that shows that 95% of all AI pilots fail. And one of the big reasons of it is there's real no measurement of it, right? So some of the biggest causes is there's no measurement of ROI, right? A lot of times we just have users or businesses that say, this is really cool. We got to get an AI. Let's just spin up something and just start using it. But there's no real measurement of, once it's spun up, what does that even mean, right? Where are you kind of looking at that and saying, well, this was a success or a failure if you have kind of no metrics to go against? So with that, also as part of that ROI is developing a use case. Again, lots of customers I meet with say they bought whichever flavor of LLM is out there, but there was no real use case for it. Just they had kind of that FOMO of AI, and they felt that they just needed to jump right into it without kind of taking a step back and figuring out, why do we need to go into AI or use this particular one for AI? Again, part of that is no outcome or goal, right? It's just AI is cool. Let's turn it on and let's see what happens. That generally doesn't translate well, right, to the bottom line and actually kind of figuring out, is this what we needed? Again, no test plan in place for that pilot, just the pilot gets kind of spun up because there was an idea, but that idea again had no sense of a use case or an ROI, or really even a testing mechanism to say whether that pilot was a success or failure. And then again, just some of it is just lack of AI knowledge, because again, it is very overwhelming out there today. There's all these different models, and then all these other, what I would call niche or very specific models that do things like read contracts or make videos or whatnot, right? So it is very overwhelming. So they'll pick something and try and, as the saying goes, take a square peg and mash it through a round hole. That same thing happens with AI, where they will find a particular model or LLM and try and make it do all these other things that they want, not knowing maybe that wasn't the best model for what they were trying to do with that. Again, because all of these things weren't in there, the use cases, any type of KPIs or test plan against it to say that this pilot was a success or a failure. Uh, AI is it is not a strategy. I hear that a lot. Like, AI, it's our strategy. No, it has to be the tool that executes that strategy. It's a tool, just no other tool than anything else that you've used today. It's just going to help you get there to that point. It's going to make it more, again, whatever your goals or KPIs are around AI, right? Is that uh, operational efficiencies? Is it, having folks do more with less? Those types of things. Or maybe there's some convoluted system out there that you're using that you think AI can kind of automate a lot of those things within the back end of it. Again, it differs per there, but again, it's the tool that helps you get there. All right, so let's talk about kind of these different. We're going to kind of dive into more details when we get a little further into this presentation. But again, identifying the pain points, right? We need to understand what are we trying to solve here for this. Again, not just turning AI for the sake of AI. What are we trying to solve with AI? And again, every customer out there, and I would even argue, even in a particular customer, every department is going to be slightly different of what kind of their pain points are, right? Within that. So that's why it's also that if you do go down the path of doing a pilot or whatnot, that you also include multiple different groups within that, not just an IT thing, because again, IT is going to look at it from a different lens than say an HR or marketing or whatnot or a finance. So it definitely helps to kind of get that mix of groups into some sort of pilot or testing of the early stages of AI to get a very rounded look at what it could do. Again, focus on the measurable, outcomes of what this is going to be. Get some sort of KPI on there. Again, part of those use cases, right? Identify, hey, we are having a problem with this. An example would be like RFPs are taking way too long to do, right? That's a measurable business outcome that we want to reduce that time of creating RFPs as the example, right within there. And then again, we have to always make sure that we're aligned with the strategy, right? Whatever that strategy is, these use cases have to meet that strategy. The AI has to meet that strategy, the LLM, all of those fun things. Whatever we decide we're going to build or do has to go along with that. So we kind of have these kind of three different buckets, if you will, right? Evaluate, assess, and kind of prioritize. Like I said, we're going to go into a lot more details into these things, but I'll kind of hit on a couple of them. Data availability and quality, right? So is everything exposed to AI that needs to? And then again, we'll talk about later, does everything need to be exposed to AI? Probably not, depending on what it is and certain regulatory things. Uh, you know, want accuracy levels of these things. And again, some of that is going to go back to the top one of data quality, right? Within there. So that's also something that will help or hinder, right? Driving some of those things within there. Again, security and compliance, last thing you want to do is kind of open this up to, you know, any type of security flaws or anything that you might have going on within there before you basically pointed AI at it, because it's just going to be kind of another, under the microscope, if you will, or kind of balloon that up, if you will. Then again, resource availability, right? We hear that a lot. So again, the impact, right, is quantifiable ROI. That's what we're always trying to go after in all of our AI projects. Is we're doing this workshop or we're building this thing or we're connecting to the system, what is the ROI of it, of going through that, right? Because there's going to take time and energy to go and build this thing or connect to this thing or do something. What are we getting out of it, right? We have to measure that, because while that may not be something of the, that we're looking at today, but maybe next year when that bill comes in, right, and we have X amount of, dollars for AI, where did we, where is the comparison of that? Where did we shave time off, or operational efficiencies that I talked about earlier? Where did that cut that down so that this new kind of bill or this new piece of that is not just, just another bill that we're getting on top of something that we don't really need? I mean, that's the whole point of AI, right? Making things more efficient and whatnot. Again, scale the impact, time to value. Again, is very, in my experience with these things, is very quick, and a lot of times that we can get kind of time to value with AI because it moves and changes and all those fun things. Um, with it, and again, it's a strategy, right? Again, I hear this a lot that my competitor is doing it, so we need to do it because they were able to cut some process that this other company does also. So again, strategy is definitely part of this too. And then again, what's the technical feasibility? You got to look at those things because again, some of those projects in AI are very large, and is it technically feasible for the organization to do that yet when maybe they haven't even rolled out AI to the general population, right? That might not be it. That might not be where you take your first step of it. Again, every customer is different. You don't want to implement complexities into it either, right? The whole idea of AI is making things easier for it. Where the value lies, again, I can just give you my kind of opinion and things that I see with customers, but these are kind of the different, areas that we see kind of where the value is, right? What Again, I have lots of customers that will come and say, I want to build this one thing, whatever it is. It could be an agent, it could be an MCP server or whatever it is. And then one of the questions I always ask them is, well, how many people actually touch this thing that we're looking at building? And they're like, two people. Right, and I say, "Well, kind of what is the rest of the organization doing around AI? Are they using it? Do they have it?" And then a lot of the times I hear, "No." like, no, like nobody's using AI. This is kind of our first step into it. I will guarantee always that you will get a bigger bang for your buck of having just the general population on board with AI, because what it's going to do a couple things. One, instead of two people getting, maybe some efficiencies in this thing that they're doing once a week, once a month, whatever. Now you have, again, if you're, 200, 500,000 people, whatever, now all of them are getting, operational efficiencies across their day, their week, their month. And that number is much higher than the two, right? And then the other part of that, of why that is always important, is that they think differently now, right? Once you understand AI, how to use it, how to interact with it, how it can help your day, day to day out, every user I've ever worked with changes how they think of things. So if you kind of go back to that initial one of, maybe it was an RFP that we're trying to, you know, consolidate it down from 2 weeks to, a day or something like that as a thing. But again, that touches two people. um, I promise you that once everybody understands AI, that kind of the approach of how that would have been tackled is very different from what you initially thought. Because people look at the whole system as now, AI can fix something or be utilized this way. So it's not just this RFP anymore, this, agent or system. It's everything. It's email, it's presentations, it's sales data, forecasting data. Everything gets touched once the users start using AI. And then again, like I said, it changes the way that they think of things. So your data is your differentiator, right? So you can have basically this generic, LLM that you're just talking to, not really feeding it any type of information. That is company specific data, right? Now we're just getting into just general things where it's just answering general things, but it doesn't know your company, the things that you're doing, your customers, the way that your people work, all that stuff, right? So that's kind of the phase of this where we want to take that data, put it in there so that it's now relevant to me or relevant to you or your business, right? So that it understands this is how we're going to, do this thing for our customers. Because, like I said, almost every customer I work with, it's very, very different of how they either approach this or how they do that. Even if it's the same thing, right? If it's something as simple as invoicing, right? It's not the same invoicing across all these different customers, even if they're in the same industry, because of various systems or various knowledge, or even just technical gaps that people possess or don't possess within there. And so it's very different for every different customer that we deal with, even if it's the same kind of use case around that. So that's what helps get this is making AI yours, right, within there by bringing your data in there. So again, a lot of stuff here on here, but we want to kind of pick some of these part. Is, one of the things that we always see is, like I said earlier, is FOMO, right? I hear this quite often, is that my competitor or someone else in our, industry is using AI, so we got to use AI. And a lot of it is I don't even know where to start. And again, that's where we come in and we help them from the very baby steps of that, of figuring out where they need to go with it, what they need to do with it, what models make sense for that, all that fun stuff. But, part of this piece is putting in technical guardrails, right? So that could be a lot of different things. Within there is putting in maybe blocking certain AI, right? Again, one of the things that you want to make sure is, again, as you see kind of on that lower left one, is that company AI policies, right? You want a policy, you got to have a policy so that this new thing that people are going to be using, they know how to, rules of engagement on it. They need to understand how to use this thing now. And that happens, that will come about with a company AI policy. And then part of that will be in those technical guardrails will help drive that. Like I said, if you want to block certain models, right, not leave it open to everything, which again is my recommendation, right? That you pick the models that you decide on. And then those are kind of it. You don't necessarily leave it open because you have to have some governance or structure of the tools that you're using and the people that are using it. And hopefully that they're doing it in the proper way within that. And again, there are certain, things that we can put in front of it to help those things. Again, company policies, super important. Model evaluation and monitoring. So why is that important, or kind of where does that come about? I hear a lot of companies, I'll talk to them and I'll say like, "Hey, what did you are you, what are you doing with AI?" And I hear a lot of the same thing. And again, not picking on any particular LLM, but they'll pick out this one and they'll say, I went with this one." I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool. What was kind of your deciding factor of why you decided to go with that model?" And they say, "Oh, well, I saw this video on YouTube of it did this really cool thing with videos or something like that." I'm like, "That is very cool. do you do videos? And then the answer is always no. So I'm like, well, why was that kind of the deciding factor of why you would want to go with that model? And it's, it was because it was interesting or it was cool or whatever it is, but that really didn't kind of answer of why we went for this particular model. Does that actually help your users? Is there a use case that you found that this model is going to help? So that's part of this, right? Is figuring out what model makes sense for your business. And again, every customer is different. They're going to have different combinations of them. Some might just have one because that's what it satisfies and whatnot. And then again, you have to look at this and monitor it and see the usage of it. Is it being ethically used right? All of those fun things within the system itself. And then last but not least, the most important one in my opinion is the training and communication around that, right? I can't tell you time and time again how I have had lots of customers who have, in some instances, thousands of employees that they just said, "Hey, here you go. Here's AI. Have at it. It's easy. So you guys will figure it out." Um, it it is like I do believe AI is easy once you understand how to prompt and things like that within AI. But to the average user, they don't do that. They don't. They're just given this thing, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to use it like Google, right? They're just going to go in there and they're going to type in what a couple of keywords like they're used to in search, and then they're going to get back search results, and they're going to sit there and say, I don't even understand why I'm using this. I could just use Google, right, to get those same results in there, until they understand kind of the power of the prompt, and doing different prompts in there to get different outcomes within there of being able to go ahead and, hey, maybe I want to pull this information and I want to put into a bulleted list. And then also, I know this is a very technical topic I'm saying, so now I want you to not only put it in a bulleted list, but do it in a non-technical manner so that we can go ahead and, understand what this is for the audience that I'm trying to do. So a lot of those things will begin changing as users start to do different things with it. But it's super important that they understand those basics. And again, it only takes a couple classes of prompting and whatnot and understanding the specific model and the pros and cons of what it does. And users are generally off to the races, but this is a very important piece of it. And again, I see a lot of customers who will invest in something. We will start to look at the usage of it, right? And we find out it's like only being used for, say, like email summaries or something, which, in my opinion, it's a very expensive email summary tool, right? So and it's really just because it didn't understand the other capabilities of what it did. So training is super important, and especially kind of tying it back to that ROI of it, right? So again, privacy, it's huge. You got to protect your data with that, right? Within those things. And again, if you're in the Microsoft sphere, something like a purview is great, right? For that of doing that. Or if you're in Google, some DLP policies on there. But again, it's going to protect your data within there that AI is touching, right? Within a piece of that. And again, that's another thing of, does all your data need to be in there? And again, that's another great way that, purview can help with those types of things, is you can kind of block certain file types, right? By, so that they won't be ingested by AI. Maybe that's a policy right within there that you'll have to think about or consider within there. And again, that kind of talks about a regulatory considerations, right? Where we're sitting right now with AI, it's kind of the Wild West frontier, if you will, of there's not too many laws. A couple are coming, right? The UAE, I think it's called, AI bill is kind of going out. California has just done one. It reminds me of kind of the early days of the cloud, where it was just there, and then all of a sudden like GDPR came in and all that fun stuff. We're going to have the same thing with AI, right? So that's where tools like that can help. Where again, just saying that maybe either some regulatory consideration comes down from Congress or something that says if it's financial data, it can't be used with financial personal data. It can't be used with AI as an example, or it could even be as far as your company policy. Maybe you're a law firm and you have, a rule that says anything that is creating customer assets or something can't be used with AI. Again, just as an example, that's where again some of those things can come in there and help by basically kind of blocking that from AI, so that again you can kind of be in the realm of your policies and again be safe within there, so that that stuff isn't touching there. Another piece of this is the access of it, and the access is, like I said previously, does all of the data need to touch it? Do you need all of that stuff in that, to touch that LLM so that model's doing stuff? Again, I know we had a couple slides ago where we were showing like a generic one where you're just basically asking questions of AI, but none of your data is part of it. So definitely it's important to it, but does all of your data need to be part of it? again, that's up to you to decide. I have customers that are kind of mixed. Some do, some have all of their data in there, and some have certain types of data, depending on what they're trying to do or their goal with AI or whatnot within it. Again, all of these things kind of combined together help, protect the company. Again, we talked about some of the safeguards, access controls, permissions, the right data, right? So what does all this stuff mean, right? Again, some of the safeguard things, right, is again making sure that that is governed right. That you have the certain maybe permission set on that. Again, that's kind of tying into the next one. Again, data governance is super important, right, around these things. What I always say is you got to have to find that Goldilocks of governance, right? It can't be like so open that we like have no rules and anybody can do anything they want in there, but it also can't be so closed that they can't do anything because they'll, believe me, they'll find something else to do, right, kind of outside of the company. And you don't want that, right? You want kind of the company approved ones within there. So that's big on that. And then again, access controls, right? Have those things in place where maybe a governance policy is, where you're doing some sort of group based permissioning versus onesie twosie, right? Because the accidental, you know, oversharing can happen, or yeah, we'll just give this whole group access. And then again, over the years, that can be bad, with that, especially if maybe users change different roles, right, within there, that we're going to have a problem with that. That, not that this would happen, but let's say that you had a user in, HR that had access to all of these HR things and social security numbers and reviews and all that stuff. And then a couple years later, they said, I want to move to IT. Well, if you're kind of doing a onesie twosie permission, you're gonna have to remember to go manually remove those from the HR site, but most companies don't. And again, whenever we've done audits on this, they don't. But if you're using some sort of group base around their role, then that automatically happens, right? That, the day that they've kind of transferred over, they've lost access to that HR data, but gained access to all this stuff in IT that they never had before. So that's why looking at group base kind of access controls are super important on that. And again, permissions, right? Let's talk about that piece too, right? um Permissions is, not only from the model side of things, should it have permissions to look at certain things, but also me, should I have permissions to look at certain things? And again, there's lots of controls that you could put in place to make sure that there's no accidental oversharing, or that some of those things are removed from AI with those permissions. And then kind of the last one, or a very important one in my opinion, is the right data, right? So I hear lots of times, right, that AI isn't bringing back the right information or whatnot. A lot of that is just it has the wrong data in there. And kind of to give you an example of this is, what I would consider stale data or even duplicate data, right? If I have a bunch of versions of something running around, let's pretend that there was a policy document that was created, right? Let's say in 2020, and then a copy was made of that, and then it was renamed to 2021, and a couple little things were tweaked in it, and then we repeated the same thing for 2022, and a couple things were tweaked. And so basically I have, 5 6 years of these policy documents. Well, if I haven't had any type of retention policy, or I'm not, having that single source of truth for the documents, where I'm not like archiving that stuff off, now the model has access to all 5 6 years of that, right? It's got like 2020 or 2019 to 2025's policies. Now that poses a different problem now, because if I'm a user and I go to the LLM, hey, what's our travel policy? Well, let's pretend that the travel policy, you could have a budget of $500, let's say in 2020, but in 2025, we've changed that to 200. Well, if I ask the model that day and it just so happens to pick that one from 2020, and I ask it and it's going to tell me, right, $500 budget. So now I'm going to go and do my thing. And then when I go to submit my expenses, I'm going to get rejected. And I'm going to say, why am I getting rejected? And they're going to say, well, because our policy says 200. And I'm going to say, but AI told me 500, right? So it can run into issues like that. And then obviously it gives a perception issue from the users that is just not very reliable. And of course, we don't want that, right? We don't want users to think that it's always doing bad things, wrong things, because again, this is an investment. There are some metrics that are, going to be attached to that we want to make sure that we're capturing with that. And if it's not bringing the right things, then just users aren't going to use it. So it's super important to have kind of all of these things strung together, within there to help that, right, within the whole piece of it. And another thing I'll say is, from also just the right data, is, do I need access to all of this stuff even though it's not secure or whatnot? And I'll give you the example is, let's pretend that there is a spreadsheet in finance site, let's say, and there's nothing secret in it, right? It's kind of generalized information, let's say, or something that they're kind of specifically doing within their environment or their group. Well, if they just kind of open that up to the entire company and now everybody has access to that, well, again, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but now it can be a bad thing for me when I'm starting to go into the LLM and ask it things, right? Like, oh, can you help me create something based off of some data? It's going to use that, right? That access to that document that I have as part of my model, as part of my bringing things back. And it could do one of two things. Either one, I get way too much stuff back, right? And then I can possibly run into hallucinations with too much data coming back, or it's just going to bring back wrong data, right? So I might be asking about certain things about numbers, but because I have access to this spreadsheet in finance, maybe it's starting to bring some of that information back to me, which isn't really relevant to what I'm looking at. And then again, now AI has a perception problem, right? To where that we're looking at it and it's not very valuable to us because every time I ask it, it's bringing the wrong data or not the data that I would think that it should be within there. And here's kind of a diagram of what we talked about, right? But let's kind of walk through of what this is kind of what we have found to be a good kind of mechanism to go through an AI process, right, within it. First and foremost, you got to start with your use cases, right? Again, this is nothing new I haven't talked about already today. But again, got to look at that. Got to look at the use cases. Why are we getting this thing? What are we trying to solve, right? Oh, we're trying to figure out this operational efficiency in finance or whatever it is because of X, Y, and Z. That's our use case. We should have many use cases, right? And then from that, we will prioritize that. And again, that could be off all sorts of different metrics that it gets prioritized. It could be this one has the biggest, benefit. This one has touches more people. This one is going to help out this department who's understaffed, right? Whatever that is, you have to kind of make that determination of what that use case is going to be or what kind of the prioritization around that. Then again, we gotta finalize what is our success criteria, right? Is it eliminating time from doing a process? Is it excuse me, um, whatever it is, right? We have to figure out what our success criteria is. Otherwise, all of this is for nothing, right? We don't have a way to measure that. Then from there, based off of kind of our success criteria and our prioritization, we will look at different models, perhaps, right? Again, maybe the model that you already have will do all the things that you do. Cool. Sometimes I meet with customers where that model doesn't do the exact same the thing that they're looking for, right? It might need to be a customization, whatnot. We'll figure that out from here. We need to kind of match that up with it. And then the other piece of that is the security and compliance, right? So we got to make sure that, excuse me, all of the rules that we've put in place in our policies are being adhered by this new AI. Again, whether that is a agent or some sort of MCP server or whatever type of data that we're going to throw at this, is that it's falling within there. And then again, that leads into the responsible AI considerations. An example of this would be we need to create a resume agent that looks over resumes, but we've got to make sure it's not biased, right? That it's not going to pick a certain thing out of there. So that's part of what will be in kind of our success criteria of that, right, within there. Then we have to measure what is the proof of value of this thing that we're going to do, right? Whether it's an agent, an integration, whatever that thing is, we have to measure it. What is by solving this problem, by taking the amount of time that we think it's going to take to build it, what is the proof of value of this thing? And then from there, that is the decision point. Then from that point forward, we say, okay, yes, it's worth it. Let's go ahead and develop this thing. Right. So then we go in and we pilot it, we demo it. And again, we have all that success criteria to go back. Is it solving this use case? All that fun stuff on there that it's doing exactly what we thought it would be, and then we deploy and scale it. And again, maintenance is another thing that is kind of not talked about a lot, but a lot of these things need some maintenance in the future. And what I mean by that is models change. Users, how maybe you perceived how it should be used isn't how it ends up being used, right? Again, part of that would be training, but sometimes an example would be like an agent. Sometimes we see an agent that is a single purpose built agent for something, but then when we look at some of like the user traffic where they abandon it after a certain, they'll ask a certain response, they'll get a response, and then they'll abandon the agent. Well, we come to find out that they're asking it more than what the agent was for, right? So we have kind of a two-pronged approach to that. Either one, we can go inform the users that that's not meant for. It's meant for this, or we can add that capability in there, right? That okay, well, maybe it was a policy agent, but people are asking some benefit things. So either we can create a benefits agent, or we can kind of fold in the benefits into this overarching kind of AI one with some other things, right? So that will be part of it. You will see that you will constantly want to tweak how some of these things work over time. And like I said, models will change. So if you at a later point in time change the back end kind of model of, let's say, an agent, let's say you're using like a chat GPT 4 and then 5 comes out, you might see different outputs with the different models, right? Of doing that within there. So that is something you want to evaluate. Is it worth kind of updating it to that latest model, or is it doing everything it should and then some with kind of the model that you originally built it on within there? So again, once you've done that, then we kind of repeat this process for everything that we're trying to do within AI. Where to start? So again, that's where we come in, right? We have kind of three offerings that we look at from this, and these are kind of our three first steps, again, depending on where you're at, right? We have this AI advisory and impact workshop. So again, this identifies the use cases, the ROI. Basically the first step you saw on that previous slide there, right? It's kind of those first two steps there. We're identifying what are the use cases and then what are the ROI of those use cases if we do said thing, right? Whether it's build something, whether it's in some cases, again, we have had customers come to us that don't even have AI yet and they want to try and see where the use cases will lie within it. So again, we take them through workshops of what AI is and how it can benefit them. And then we walk them through what are some pain points that you have today. Oh, there's this process I have to do and it's X, Y, and Z, and it takes me whatever. So you look at what that will look like with AI and then work with them on what that could look like within there. And then that helps definitely drive kind of the next pieces, right? Is that once we have that ROI, you could say, oh, wow, there's all these ROI cases in finance, for example. So maybe it makes more sense to go ahead and kind of start there, right, as our first step of that. The next step, though, is also within this first beginning part is the data readiness, right? As we've talked about, to nauseum to this point in time, is your data right? Because again, AI is only going to be as good as the data you pointed at, and if the data you pointed at isn't very good, AI isn't going to be very good either. So again, from that being stale data or just not the right data, right? Sometimes we have users who are looking for, I really wish it would pull this type of data in, and that data just doesn't exist, or that data is in a totally different system on that. So there is a gap there with that. So it's understanding that stuff, getting your data ready so that it could be what we call AI ready within that. And then the last piece of this is the security piece, right? Is understanding what is exposed, what are your policies around this, right? On this stuff within here. Maybe again, maybe you have a policy that says, sensitive info types like social security numbers should never be used in AI. So again, that's something we want to review and see, is that stuff being exposed to it? Or again, if it's before you've even gotten that far, which is also great, then we can help identify where those locations are and then kind of shut those off from AI so that they're not being ingested or used on it from a policy perspective to make sure that your exposure of that data is none or very limited so that you can use AI in a safe and practical manner. And then again, following along with all the rules and regulations and policies within the company or your industry and organization. From those first kind of three steps, I find that then we can move on to other things, right? Where full blown implementation, and again, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different customers. From there, again, data monetization. Sometimes we just have a bunch of stale data or data that isn't the right type of data, or it's in a different system or a very old system that we want to kind of update. That's another thing. Again, user adoption. I talked to quite a bit about this. So don't need to go too deep into that here, but again, user adoption is huge on this stuff because the people need to understand how to use it. And then again, we have Gen AI security services that will help, kind of mitigate a lot of these things before they happen and kind of be there step by step within there on them. And with that, that is all I had today, and I'll leave it open for any questions that anybody might have. Looks like we got two questions right now. One, What is your suggestion to get cross-functional collaboration to be cross cross-function collaboration to be on the same page with AI? Right. So I'm assuming that's like multiple departments or different groups, right? One thing I'm a big fan of is a champions program, right? Allowing users or kind of a collective of that to come together on AI. Because again, everybody's going to learn something different. Finance might have something that they learn that's really cool that maybe another group isn't necessarily using, but they could kind of take that same idea, right, kind of to the next step once they've understood it. So it's great, in my opinion, to have kind of this champions program for that, right? That folks across different workloads, again, many departments. Some, again, we work with the customers sometimes where, again, we help them with their champions program. Sometimes they just want like one individual, like this is our AI person, and they're going to kind of drive it. Others say, no, we're going to have either kind of a group of people, and some actually say, no, we're actually going to have a one individual from every department to be part of kind of this champions program because they're all going to bring something slightly different to the table, which I totally agree on, right? But I understand that some customers can't do that, don't have the time or the bandwidth to allow that. But that helps a couple things. One, like I said, everybody's gonna use AI slightly different. So by having kind of this group mentality of being able to share those thoughts and also have a place for it, right? So again, if you're in Google using like Google Sites or again, probably not email, Slack channel, SharePoint site, maybe a Microsoft team, those types of things, so that you have this place to where people can talk, suggest new things, post things about it. Again, almost having something like a prompt of the week, right? That's a great thing that we generally recommend and help users set up with that with companies within there, so that it almost has this excitement around it that AI isn't this big scary thing, that it's kind of a community led effort. Because again, like I said, everybody's going to use it slightly different, so it helps kind of bring new features ahead. And also, you don't want every user in your environment to be signing up for all of these blogs on Copilot or Gemini or Claude or whatever, and try to understand all the nuances of things that are coming out. That's where the champions team can come in, right? Where they're kind of looking at these new things. And again, maybe they met with a group last month and they said, hey, I really wish that it AI would do this thing, and maybe the AI that you have doesn't do that thing right now, but then maybe next month there's an update and now it does that thing. Well, again, your end users aren't going to know about that, but that's where the champions program can come in, and they can kind of notify that user or users or group, or again post it and say, hey, you asked about this feature, it wasn't here a month ago, well guess what, now it's here, and here it is, right, let's check it out. So that's that's a great way to kind of help get multiple departments together, right? Or a company, I would say, not just multiple departments, but have multiple representatives from departments to kind of come into that together, and it helps that. Um, Other question I got: how can my company encourage innovation and experimentation? Okay, so I'd say multi-part answer here. So one, you have to have processes in place. Again, we talked about a lot of it earlier, right around governance and all that fun stuff, um, and policies and all that. But basically, you have to have process in place, whatever that is, right? Whether you're going to allow, not allow certain things, but that process has to be there. But it has to be, a process that's in a controlled manner, non-production data, right? We don't want to be testing these things on that. And again, if that's where the policy comes in, that maybe there's customer data can't be in there, make sure that our we have maybe a test environment, which again I'm a fan of testing that stuff in a different area that's kind of away from everything in non-production data. But you also have to measure it, right? Again, we talked about that, I think, in like the second or third slide, around having KPIs, use cases, having a process for, so basically all of this stuff you have to measure, because if I'm going to experiment or try something out, I have to have a way of measure to say that it worked or it didn't work, or there was success or not success. So you have to have that KPI. But you also need, again, that almost, what I would say, kind of a company level policy or method that users can do, so that they don't feel that this is an uphill battle, right? Um, because then they're not going to want to do it, right? They might have a very great idea around AI, or maybe they need to introduce a new model, or they want to try a new agent. But if the process to actually get that kind of off the ground, or at least to even try it, is, you have to go through all these committees and all that fun stuff, no one's going to do it. And you're going to find that they're not going to be uh, on I don't want to say not on board because they are, but they're not going to kind of keep pushing, their AI knowledge or kind of pushing the company's AI knowledge further if they feel like there's always this roadblock every time they want to try something new. So again, I think it's all kind of collective of not only having the policies and governance and all that stuff in place so that you're safe, but also other rules around that of, making sure like it's not tested in production data, but have, some way to measure whether this thing that I tested was a success or a failure based off of those criteria. And then again, have kind of that maybe it's a governance board type of thing where they have to kind of present what they're going to do or whatnot, right? Kind of a low area of entry, barrier of entry. I'm sorry, to do that with that um, to the users, and that will help, right? Because again, like I said earlier, you got to have that Goldilocks of governance, right? Have some security measures in place to make sure it's safe to experiment and all that fun stuff. But you want your users to experiment with the stuff because they'll come up with ways to use AI that you never thought of because you're not kind of doing their day in and day out that they do. You might be doing something a certain way or using a certain system a certain way, and they're doing it totally different. And I can just tell you that from meeting with lots of different groups, with lots of different customers, is that there's plenty of times where, um, you know, separate teams are using the same system, say maybe like a Salesforce or something like that, but they're doing it totally different, right? Totally, totally different from each other. So that's important, right? That you kind of get the different perspectives of that, and again, through experimentation, allowing them to kind of experiment with things in a safe and controlled manner, that will you will see not only your adoption, but you will see how you change the way that you're doing things. And I say this a lot where we have, certain, I said earlier, where there's certain customers that will come to us and say like, hey, I want like this one AI agent built a certain way for, again, just say like an RFP process. Um, and that's great, but then the next question I say is, "Well, what is the rest of the company doing with AI?" And they're like, "No, nothing. Nobody's doing anything with AI." This is kind of where we're starting. One, you'll get bigger bang for your buck of having two, three, 500,000 people doing it versus four or five people doing an RFP. But also, once your users understand AI and get what I call AI literacy, I promise you, whatever processes that they were doing previously around that RFP would change, right? So y- you're going into what I would say is like they're kind of going into it with the mindset of I want AI on on an old process is basically what they're doing, right? Once they understand AI, new processes coming out, and I will guarantee that whatever they thought they wanted to do with that agent, say 4 or 5 months ago, and now that there's AI literacy across the company, they will approach that what they thought they wanted an agent to do a certain way very differently because once they have that kind of AI literacy, they will think very differently of how they want to interact every day, interact with that RFP. Other ideas can spur from that of maybe going into other systems because it was very, maybe linear that was just looking at just this RFP, not maybe the bigger picture of, how it integrates into, maybe a submission system or whatever, right? So all of those things will absolutely help with um allowing that, right? Kind of allowing that piece of the experimentation and then again giving that AI literacy across the whole company because they will think different, right? As again, that's the old Apple tagline, right? Think differently or think different. That's the same thing here. Once your users understand AI and they have that aha moment with it, they will start thinking very differently. They will look at everything that they do all day long, from emails to reports to all of these things and say, okay, this is we can tackle this very differently now by doing it this way. So yeah, so that's definitely one of the things that you want to think about within there. So with that, that was all the questions we had. So thank you again for your time today. Hope everybody enjoyed the session and reach out. Thanks.